remembering to turn the volume down on my phone.
And I'm going to guess now that people, because the chat room just told me there's no sound.
Oh no!
Every time OBS updates, it changes settings for audio.
So
So
they didn't
nice.
hear any of that?
No.
Well, the stream, but that's not as many people as will listen to the podcast.
Oh, okay.
I think we're just very briefly, just sum up for them again.
So essentially, it's the yes and. If the player wants to do something and you can construe any way in which it will work within your understanding of the setting, let it happen.
Right.
It might be a very high or very low probability of happening, but let them do what they want, essentially.
And
to some degree.
I think the best thing to sort of avert that sort of misunderstanding that you can have when a player wants to do something that doesn't fit into the sort of rules of physics of the world is to make sure you have a session zero where you explain as thoroughly as you can what you're looking for thematically.
In a campaign, that is definitely a thing. In a one shot, in a con situation, that you can't really do that.
Also, sometimes things arise that you need to address on the spot. Like, for example, your little gravity pocket thing, which is like, all right, we need to stop now and discuss how gravity works in this system. I hadn't thought to bring it up in session 0, so I'm going to address it now.
Right, yeah.
The demons that project gravity. All right, and they can now hear us again.
Yay. Okay. Sorry about that. You'll have to listen.
Thank you, chat room, for
letting us know.
Trouble checking.
The audio recorder, hardware,
perfectly fine.
Always works.
Well,
mix software, put a computer into it. Not always.
Every time it updates.
This thing has never failed. This is a little hardware recorder I have. It's a Tascam, and I use it to record the audio when we're in the studio. And it
never.
The only time it screws up is when someone forgets to press record,
which
awesome. You can't blame on the machine.
No,
I remember when those things came out, and they're game changing.
I mean,
people use them for like professional recordings and everything now because they make various qualities and sizes. And it is a complete and total game changer when it comes to digital recording.
This will record at 24-bit,
and they're not that expensive.
No.
And they work with everything.
Yep.
They're really great.
If you're looking to start your own podcast.
Or even if you're an amateur musician and stuff. You stick one of those like out in the front row, you can record the whole show, and you can actually get decent quality out of it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
They're fantastic. I love them. I'll go ahead and start the email. And
it's
then
a longer one this time.
It is a longer one.
It's 2.5 pages.
Yeah. It's good. It's a good sized email. This is from Sean from just outside Washington, D.C., and I put the title as "Run Away!"
Run away.
This is the guy who wrote in last week, too, right?
Yeah.
From some undisclosed location
just outside Washington, D.C.
I actually know some friends who built a recording studio in Arlington, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. And they named it Undisclosed Location Studios.
Because it's in Arlington.
Exactly.
He was in the chat last week, and I think he said he's in Maryland.
Okay, well, Arlington's Virginia, so it's the other side.
Is that where the Pentagon is?
No, the Pentagon's in Arlington.
I thought he said maybe it was Virginia. Anyway, I know he was in the chat, and he sort of...
He specified?
A little bit more.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't want to be too specific.
You also don't... If you're actually in Washington, D.C., sometimes you don't
wait a second. Where the fuck is the NSA located? This may be our handler.
Did you...
They're in Fort Meade, Maryland.
Fort Meade? Oh, God.
Thank you, sir, for sending us your email.
Oh, no.
Please don't disclose my porn viewage history.
Or do. You might get dates out of it.
Dearest Happy Jackers, Jackophiles, and the Happy Jacks Nation, today's letter for the advice show is about how PCs can always surprise you and ask your thoughts about fitting into the mold of DMing of another person's game. I'm guessing you are familiar with Friedrich Nietzsche's phrase, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger."
Nietzsche. It's from Fish Called Wanda.
Is it?
No.
Never been a Nietzsche fan. I was more of a Camus guy.
Yeah, it was the character in Fish Called Wanda, the Kevin Kline character.
Otto
was always quoting...
That's Italian for 8, you know.
He was always quoting Nietzsche.
He was quoting a lot of things, all of them wrong.
Yes.
And the London Underground is not a political movement.
Yeah. It isn't.
Those are all wrong, Otto. I looked them up.
She's so great. That whole movie's pretty.
Oh, it's.
Yet, does it make us stronger if not being killed is largely a function of having run away, rather than face the challenge? Rather than try to answer that question, and answer this right away, first, some context. I will say right off the bat that you are at least getting some good cardio. So,
Zombieland.
Live to run away so you can run another day?
Yeah. I recently had
Braves Robin.
I recently had the honor and pleasure of being a guest DM for a D&D 5e game, my first foray back into D&D since 3.5. The overall concept of the game is to have, and I actually really liked this idea, and it kind of reminded me of the TV series Sliders a little bit.
The overall concept.
2 sentences in.
2 sentences in. The overall concept of the game is to have a different, possibly recurring group of DMs that facilitate adventures for a core group of players. If you're wondering how this works, at the very beginning of the game, the PCs encountered an artifact which caused them to shift across worlds and time. With every jump, they retain their memories, character features, and gear, except for the artifact, which they must find in a new story arc in hopes that the next jump will take them home.
Like Quantum Leap.
It's like both of those shows, kind of. It really is. Let
me just say that we did a version of this back in the day when we were playing Champions. And each DM would run like a little story arc. And usually it came out of necessity. It was like, I don't want to GM today. So what would happen is we all kind of basically played in the same version of the world. It's like when comic books would cross over, or you had like 4 different Spider-Man comic books, each taking place in New York, but different stories going on. It was kind of like that. But what ended up happening was there was one character who never one player who never GM'd at all. So his character ended up getting
all the XP.
So by the time, a GM was done with his story arc, he would come back in and he was severely underpowered. And it took us a while to figure out, like, wait a minute, Nick. You've been in all of our games. Wait a minute.
So he GM'd and TPK.
Yeah. No, he never GM'd.
Okay.
We all just gave ourselves extra XP to keep up with him, because otherwise he was like, yeah.
Okay. Each DM's story arc is a one-shot that takes place between jumps and sandboxed from the other DM's arcs, because different universe, etc. Although DMs are given the option to communicate and plan with each other. Then, with some production editing magic, a couple of the players take the recorded game and turn it into a podcast. For some shameless promo, through the interwebs, search the interwebs for Adventures from Glenview Mansion podcast. Glenview, Glenview, Mansion. Spelled the traditional way.
Right.
All one word.
Well, Glenview is all one word. And Mansion is all one word.
Yes, and Adventures.
And so is podcast. There are a few episodes out as of this writing.
Stu puts the dick in pedantic. Just saying.
There are a few podcast episodes out as of this writing, and the podcast will likely run through at least the summer and possibly longer. I was the 3rd level story arc DM and had never played with anyone in this group. This was fine since I've run plenty of one-shots for various groups before. The group was great. We all had a good time. I find one-shot gaming with strangers to be the perfect way to be surprised by players and their PCs. And this group certainly did that. Without knowing much in advance about player encounters preferences, I tried to provide a balanced mix of social, mental, and combat challenges.
You want someone else to take over?
Go ahead.
The social and mental encounters went well, but the combat encounters blew my mind. Most of the D&D, as well as non-D&D players, characters from other games, and were more than happy to slay opponents and loot treasure, sometimes to the detriment of my NPCs. Occasionally, characters from other games used a mixed diplomacy and other non-lethal combat options to overcome without killing to resolve combat, typically linking these approaches to role-playing character classes, alignment, or backstory. What surprised me about this group was their persistent preference to avoid combat altogether. They always led with social skills and character abilities, such as calm emotion spelled to prevent irritating combat.
Initiating.
I'm sorry, I like irritating combat. to prevent initiating combat or tried to run away when combat started. I've had individual players in previous games avoid combat encounters, but never an entire group avoid combat as if it were an allergy. From what I knew of these characters, none were specifically anti-physical conflict. The party consisted of chaotic neutral wizard, a lawful good barbarian, chaotic good transmutator wizard. Sometimes the group's preferred strategies worked, and sometimes it only delayed the inevitable combat from happening.
You know, I too am allergic to getting hit in the face with an axe.
Isn't that weird? So am I.
Yeah.
I roll so badly on dice, I just prefer not to be in conflict at all.
That's a fair point.
If I can just avoid it altogether and talk my way out of it.
Yeah.
With my guest DM story arc complete, I reached out to the players to learn more about this playstyle preference, and one player noted that his character became extremely averse to violence after a traumatic fight in a previous DM story arc, and I thought the strategy would offer better, he thought the strategy would offer better engagement for podcast listeners.
That's an interesting point.
Yes, it is.
We kind of, I don't know if we do it on purpose or not, but
sometimes
we don't tend to have a lot of combats in a lot of our APs. When they do happen, they tend to be more of the set piece things rather than.
When you know you're being watched, it affects the outcome.
And it is. Watching people play a role-playing game, acting, interacting with each other is a little more interesting to watch than watching people play what is essentially a board game.
Yeah, roll dice and move minis.
It depends on the board game, I suppose.
Yeah.
I await feedback from the other two players. Ultimately, while a surprising and good learning experience, this phenomenon was entirely manageable and did not seem to negatively affect anyone's enjoyment. So if everything was peachy keen, why write about it in an advice show? After that potentially superfluous background info, I finally came to the crux of the matter. Do you want to take over?
Sure.
It's a new thread here.
In my usual games, I award experience points to PCs for overcoming any type of encounter. They can overcome combat encounters through lethal, subdual, or non-violent solutions. I'd like to think I'm rather flexible on what it means to overcome an encounter. However, to me, running away is simply surviving an encounter and not necessarily overcoming it. I may award a small amount of experience points for running away from an encounter if the PCs learn something that they could use later.
Like the enemy's way too overpowered for them.
Yeah. Right. We're level 3, and that is an ancient red dragon.
Right.
I'm hiding.
Like when you're playing a role-playing game online, it's like if you take on the end boss at level 2...
It's not going to go up for you. So running away has the game mechanical effect of taking longer to earn their next character level. Okay. This recent game awarded experience by milestones. The PCs earn a level automatically when they complete each DM story arc, at least for now at lower levels. In the grand scheme of things, this could be fine since the PCs completed the overall story arc objective. However, it leaves me wondering if the PCs should earn that level regardless of if they continually avoided rather than overcame multiple encounters before reaching that arc's final objective. Hence, my motivating question about getting stronger from that which does not kill us.
Right.
I feel that having multiple DMs could complicate this issue, but can be mitigated by having DMs with adjacent story arcs to be on the same page and together manage player expectations. Yes, communication is key. My questions for today's show crew are, I guess that would be us.
Mm-hmm.
The crow shoe.
The crow shoe? Okay.
Crow shoe.
Yeah.
1. Have you ever had an entire group of PCs use an avoidance strategy towards combat encounters as their default approach for all combat in a game? If yes, how did that go? Should we go through these one at a time?
Sure,
or
yeah,
read
let's
them
go
all?
through them one at a
Okay.
time.
Every time I play
no,
GURPS.
I haven't.
Every time I play GURPS, that's our strategy.
Every game. It depends. It depends. If the players feel they have an upper hand or they have some kind of tactical advantage, they tend to not be as unwilling to go into combat.
Like in D&D, you're not going to die. You might get really clobbered.
It's
and
hard to
use
die
abilities,
in
but
5th edition.
really
You got to lose all those death rolls.
But when you're in Traveler or GURPS or something really deadly like that, you really think about,
oh yeah,
can we do this?
And then also, depending on how many unknown variables are in the combat, I've noticed that players will tend to be a little more reluctant to engage and will more likely try to talk their way out of it, or at least try to get into a position or forestall it long enough to get into a position where they think they have a perceived tactical advantage, which may in turn cause the people they're going to fight to reassess whether or not they want to have a combat. So yeah, I have had that happen.
We had a whole vampire game where nobody did anything because we were afraid to do anything.
Let's put a pin in this one too. Yeah, you guys had a bulletin board full of story arcs that were just sitting there.
Was like after like level, like,
You're gonna pick up one of these?
Just do something. He's like, but we don't want to die. You won't.
You're already dead. That's the best part.
Something.
You're vampires. You're already dead. You don't need to worry about death. You're already dead.
We were all just cowering.
That was so funny. Yeah, that was a very shining example of players that did not want to. And it wasn't just combat. It's like this is a touchy political situation. I think let's put a pin in that
because we
let's
live for
ignore it for a while.
You live forever. You don't want to screw something up that you then have to then deal with.
And you know what? If thinking of it as immortal vampires.
Yeah.
Most problems, if you ignore them long enough, they might just go away.
Why would you raise your head above the clouds so that people go, "Are you a vampire? You're trying to hide and feed and go back to bed every day. That's your goal.
Got to maintain that masquerade."
Yeah,
exactly.
And so why would you go and stir the pot about anything? You're just going to make yourself, a target, and that's the last thing you want to do.
And I think typically, I don't mind if. I mean, I would say probably the majority of the game sessions I have don't end up having combats in them. Usually the combats tend to happen either in the very beginning and at the very end. But if they happen in the middle, they happen organically. And if the party is like, we don't want to get in a fight right now, that's real easy to avoid getting in a fight.
Unless they attack you first.
Unless you're fighting like zombies.
Right, or other vampires that attacked us.
Right.
That's something you ended up doing, which is like, well, we're not going to do anything. So we got Justicar showed up, and he's coming at you with a knife. What do you do? It's like,
right.
Oh, can we run away? Not in time. Damn it.
I'm realizing now that the game I'm currently running, because I have, out of my 5 characters, 3 of them are charisma-based characters.
Ah.
So they actually have tried in not all, I won't even say most, but a lot of of the encounters they've had, they've tried to talk their way out of it first.
Sure. You play to your strengths. If you're a charisma-based character, it's like, I'm very persuading.
No, I mean,
you made a character once who's very persuading.
Yeah, these are charisma-based characters, so we have 2 warlocks and a sorcerer paladin. So it's like, yeah, no, we'll absolutely try to talk through this, but then we will fuck you up if it goes badly. So,
right.
So.
Ignatius Wang mentioned L5R, which is another game where people will heavily avoid conflict for in-game reasons as well.
Because everything has a
consequence.
Consequence,
yeah.
Everything.
And theoretically, so should it in D&D. It's just not as immediately apparent.
Right.
It's more onus on the GM to come up with those.
There's a lot more class problems. If you
Well, the other thing is that the more fiddly a combat system is, the more of a game in and of itself it is.
Yeah.
Right? And D&D certainly fits into that category.
Yeah.
And some people like playing board games, which is kind of what a lot of... GURPS is... Combat in GURPS is a board game. Mm.
Savage Worlds.
Yeah.
You got movement and you've got cones of effect.
And they're constructed to make them fun.
Yeah.
But it's also, you don't want to have to make a character.
Right. And there's even some rules that apply. It's like if you've got a speed, it makes you move the board faster. So at some point, there's a mechanical advantage to actually laying the minis out and having a board that's baked into the rules that you don't want to ignore all the time. You're like, I built this character specifically for all these moves and for all of these area of effect things. Damn it, we're putting it down on the board so I can use them.
Yeah.
Don't just hand wave it for me, damn it. Yeah. I spent points on these.
Yeah.
That's like Windy Drawers and his palace that he invited you to a party at. And the whole party's like, we're not going there. No way. We're going to figure out a way to assassinate this guy someplace on our terms.
Yes, right? Smart.
And then my map.
Yeah. I remember you were like, to your credit, Stu. See, this is where Stu makes a great GM, and he's always done this. To your credit, he said to himself in game, he goes, yeah. Why would they go into the house? That is the dumbest idea. You're right. Why would you do that?
Yep.
Because most GMs would be like, I made a map. I'm going to force you guys to get into this. No, you can't. There's a wall of force. You can't go into the bar anymore. No, you have to go into the palace because I made the map.
And I had this big sheet of paper.
Yeah,
I made the whole area out to scale.
Yep.
So it was a combat map
Yeah.
as well as just a map
Yeah.
of the guy's estate.
And I still to this day marvel because I'm not sure I had the fortitude to do that. It's because you get in the game and he literally took a step back and went, "Yeah, why would you go into his palace? That makes no sense."
And then in my head, I'm going, "Why the fuck did I spend all this time on this thing?"
Oh yeah, no, I had that.
I'm never going to go to.
I had
This.
that, I had that same reaction very recently in the game that I've been running.
Yeah.
Is because I'll design my dungeons in AutoCAD and print them out on 3
Oh, boy.
foot by 4 foot
Oh, it's
sheets.
fun. It's so much
Because
fun.
I have access to those
Sure,
kinds of
yeah.
tools, and it's. This most recent one, I actually did a full isometric map.
Oh, no kidding.
So instead of like square or hex grid, it's full isometric. So it looks. It was more of an exercise for me, but it was like, but they're running away from it. What are they doing?
I have a love-hate relationship with maps. My first Traveler game at a con, I printed up a ship that was 3 levels, and it was as long as his table.
Yeah.
It was to scale, and everybody. Were you in that? And people moving
No,
around.
I don't
and
think I was in that
fun,
one.
but
Oh, was that the Grendel?
no, that was
No,
that was
that was
a different one. This was a Traveler game, so it was all
Yeah.
in
Oh no, I remember. I wasn't in that game, but I remember it. Yeah.
these giant maps.
Anyway, so second question. What are your thoughts on awarding experience to PCs that run away from an encounter, and would that response differ based on the type of encounter?
That's an interesting. I mean, most of the games I play aren't like you don't award experience per encounter. It's you award experience when you hit milestones, or just generally for each session,
Right.
That
which is
he
different.
talks about that. He says a recent game awarded experience by milestones. He said a really great thing that I'm trying to find right now about.
What they're doing is every GM basically runs a session, and then the players level up after that session. And he's right, but I mean, certainly, if the players come up with a creative way to get around what was meant to be a combat encounter, you should give them the XP
Yes,
for it.
absolutely.
They defeated the encounter.
Reward creativity. Always reward
Right.
creativity.
But I don't know if I would give, like, if you're let's say they need to get past these guards, right, to get into this place for the storyline to continue a certain direction or whatever. So they come up to the guards and they try whatever it is they're going to try to get past them. They can't get past them, so then they realize the only way we're going to get past them is to kill them. So they turn around and walk away.
Right. And then maybe try to come up with another way to get in, or they
Can try to come up with another way to get in, but the act of turning around and going the other direction, I don't know if I would award experience
I'm
for
trying
that.
to find. He had a sentence in his statement here that I thought was really, which is basically when you avoid a combat encounter, you don't get experience from it. But anyway, this reminds me of something that I heard a while ago that really stuck in my mind, and I've been waiting to sort of bring it up and discuss it. Which is, it's maybe specific to D&D, but when you're only awarded experience for killing things, why would you say then at Harry Potter's wizard school, why would you not just, because you don't get experience from learning anything, why don't you just have a dungeon full of goblins, you go down there and blow them away and get your experience up that way? So for every goblin you kill, you get experience, but you don't get experience for casting a spell. You don't get experience for...
Right.
And this is maybe older versions of D&D. So there's something to be said about awarding experience for things that other than combat, and having to work that out.
I actually heard... I was watching some history of D&D video or something like that, and supposedly, I'm not entirely sure how accurate this is, the very first version of D&D, whether that be actually chainmail or whether it's like the very first Dungeons and Dragons, you actually got experience for avoiding combat. You did not get experience for killing things.
I don't think chainmail. I don't remember if chainmail had an experience system. I don't know if it did.
It was, but that went away in every subsequent edition of D&D and most other role-playing games as well. Powered by the Apocalypse, you get experience for failing,
right?
Which I think is actually cool.
That actually makes kind of a lot of sense.
Yeah, you learn from your failures, kind of thing. I give XP in my D&D game for cool role-playing moments and such. Separate and above whatever they get from defeating a horde of zombies or whatever it is. because I want to reward that kind of a thing, and it is. You actually have to dive in and read the full Dungeon Master Guide before you find out that, oh no, that's actually recommended in the DMG, is to give XP for creativity and for role-playing moments and things like that. It's just, it's not listed as easily accessible as like, this monster is worth this amount of XP or whatever like that. But like the versions of D&D that I've actually read the DMG for, which is in my case 3, 5, 4, and 5, all of them have that.
Right.
It's just buried in the DMG, buried way deep in the DMG, and like you have to actually read the whole.
It might be in the first edition. I've got a copy of the first edition one, but it is an organizational nightmare.
Yeah,
it's like Gary Gygax went and decided, I'm going to write a bunch of essays on GMing.
He did,
and I'm going to kind of collect them in here, and I'm also going to throw in a bunch of tables that I didn't have room for in the player's handbook.
And they were still working out this whole role play thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, that might be in there, and I've read that book extensively back when I used to play first edition D&D. And it's probably in there somewhere, but and then you're trying to go through all that high again too.
Yeah.
And it's,
I found the sentence I was looking for.
Okay.
It may clarify what we're doing. So, however, to me, this is from his email, which I think he answered his own question. However, to me, running away is simply surviving an encounter, not necessarily overcoming it. I may award a smaller amount of XP points for running away from an encounter if the PCs learn something that they could use later.
Yeah.
Right. So if some ends of that combat encounter happen anyway, like they're able to glean some information, they would have they would definitely have gleaned having won the encounter. Yeah. I can see that.
I can too. To me, and it's something I think I've always done, which is I would hand out. It makes it sound kind of a nightmare because you got to keep, or at least the players have to keep track of their XP. But I would dole out XP for different things. You know, like if your wizard saved the day with a really creative use of a spell, I might award 20 XP points for that, because it's not necessarily quite like the mechanical effect you get at Savage Worlds for
like
bennies and all of that, but it is like, that was a really really great use, and here's some more XP for that.
Yeah, what I do for mine is I have a series of tick marks. Essentially, is like, I have a list of the characters, and if they do something that was really cool, I put just a little tick mark, and then at the end of it, I add up the tick marks, multiply by 150, and that's how much XP they get for cool RP.
Okay.
The problem with having a really squishy scale like that is you get people that are very dogmatic and everything has to be in a certain column, and they're like, how come he did that and got XP and I did the same thing and didn't get it? Your rules are arbitrary.
Yes, they are.
You get that guy.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you're like, well, they are kind of arbitrary,
Yep.
I make better than him.
And I make no bones about the fact that this is an arbitrary system.
So you need to, so maybe that's part of session 0. You need to have that discussion.
Yep, exactly. It was part of the session 0. It was part of the discussion. It was like, here, and it's going to be relatively minor comparatively, especially now that they're at really high levels and they're facing off against monsters that are worth thousands of XP, and it's like one point of cool RP is still only worth 150. Right. So I mean, it has a diminishing returns essentially over the course of the game.
Well, you should do it like the rest of D&D, and that should go up with their level.
Well,
you should multiply it by 150, then multiply it by their level.
Yeah, maybe.
I think you could still hand out.
They'd all be level 20 by now.
Right.
I think you could still hand out a pretty significant amount of XP if a player does something, a really creative use of a spell, or utilizes the environment.
What
in a really
I
creative
found
way
is that the way it actually works out is that as the game has gone on, I've gotten better about recording those moments, so they get more of them.
Right.
And they've been better about doing those kinds of things. They've learned as players, and they've been providing more of those kinds of cool moments, so they get more of them.
Right.
I actually like to encourage, maybe it's because it's my play style too, which is creative play. You don't just have to draw your sword and attack everything that comes your way. Can you sneak around it? What's the environment look like? When you're in combat, is there a tree I can hide behind? Are there hills? Are there boulders I can knock down? Is there a chandelier that I can knock down from the ceiling and trap all the goblins underneath? I love stuff like that. It's not illegal in D&D, but D&D doesn't really make you, it's like, all right, how would you share a chandelier? How do you have to hit it? How many points does the rope have? And then when it drops, oh god, this is too hard. Just attack the kobold. Don't. Why are you doing this?
But there even almost every version of D&D has a rule for like,
yes.
Here's like a general resolution mechanic you can use for stuff that players come up for that's not covered anywhere else.
But I
know 5th edition has it, and I'm sure 4th edition had it. And
I think your players should be rewarded for really creative thoughts like that. It's like you're fighting in a mountain pass, and you as a GM are like, all right, so I've got all my guns, and the guys look up and go, can we knock the boulders down on them? And you're like, yes, you can. Yes, you can. I didn't. What a great! Here's a bunch of XP because that was awesome.
Congratulations, you are now Ewoks.
Bill brings up a point. He's in the chat room.
Hi, Bill.
Hi, Bill.
I would love to play a game where advancement is less about player learning how to do new things and more about equipment resource based, especially since the campaign rarely actually covers the amount of time it would take to learn said new skills. That's kind of what Old Traveler was like. I don't recall. I mean, there may have been an advancement system for. I'm talking about the original little 3 black books.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was an advancement system. There might have been. I have them somewhere. I can go in and look, but our character advancement was, I got a better gun.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I remember customizing weapons and things. Shopping was a big deal in Traveler. It may still be.
Right.
In fact, I know it is because I watched your Yuma Station, Bill. Shopping and stuff is still very important in Traveler, but that's kind of the way the game is built. It's not a fault of the players. Yeah. I think that people get so hung up on this is what the rule is. You kill a monster, you get XP, and they have a hard time thinking around that box or thinking outside of that box. In many ways, killing a monster with their sword would be the least way. It's like that's what you were trained to do. You're not really getting any better at it. Coming up with a new way to kill something is a much, that's where you learn. That's when you get those epiphanies.
Right.
In many ways, you would get more experience for coming up with a creative way to avoid a conflict or to circumvent the conflict or to solve the conflict than you would be for just attacking it.
I actually think one of the more elegant experience character progression systems is old Call of Cthulhu, because you use a skill, you put a check mark next to it, right, and then you wait until you have a pause in the game. In the storyline, and you have a character advancement session. They have a name for it. That's not it. It's got another name. And then you go through all of those skills that you have a check mark next to, and you have to roll higher than them, which means the higher your skill level, the less likely you're going to advance. So the higher, because it's a percentile system,
harder and harder.
So the closer it gets to 100, the harder and harder it's going to get it to advance more.
Gotcha.
And then when you do get to advance, I think you roll a d10 and then you add that. That's what you gained from that session, but you just put check marks next to the skills you've used. That's the one thing, like in a lot of point-buy systems like GURPS, I always instituted a rule, and I don't remember if it was in the rules or not, that you didn't get to advance a skill unless you used it in that session.
I made that sort of a house rule whenever I ran Vampire.
Yeah.
And Vampire also has a very nicely defined XP awarding system. And I mean, this is also a game where you don't get hundreds of XP. You get, like, in a session, you might get 3 or 4.
Yeah, right.
GURPS
is the same way.
But it's like, okay, you get essentially, you almost always get 1 for showing up. And then, did your character learn something? Did your character do something that was badass? Did your character accomplish some goal? That was for this session. Did your character accomplish some long-term goal? Get one point for each of those things. It had nothing to do with how many other vampires you brought to their final death that particular session or anything like that. But then combat is not the focus of Vampire the Masquerade. It's as you said, it's very much let's stay away from this, opposed to like. I've never actually played Werewolf, but I imagine that as Tappy called it, the furry, rage-filled eco-terrorists.
It's not wrong.
that combat is more common, more common for Guru than for vampires.
You're playing Vampire with a bunch of gangrels. Everybody's a gangrel. It's combat's all over the place.
Or Bruja.
Because it kind of just. I'm reminded of
Whereas the Toreadors and the Ventru are like, can we not?
Charm on that? Right. Exactly. So again, that stuff plays into it. I'm reminded of some games I played back in the really early 80s, back when the heyday when people were coming up with a role-playing system every week. And it was either RuneQuest or Dragon Quest or one of the quests. And it was, you had a whole sheet full of skills and then percentage next to that. And every time you use that skill, you make a tick mark and you would get a couple points in it to improve it. But you had to do this bookkeeping of like, well, let's see here, I used my accounting skill today, and I used my throwing skill today, and I did a swimming skill. So how many points in swimming did I get? And how many? So you'd have to stop the session and award. What did you swim? Or you get 2 points in swimming. I mean, it was a whole thing, and eventually, you got cool stats for it. But it is the ultimate in whatever skill you use, you got points in and improved.
Yeah.
And it can break down. At some point, you end up with an hour and a half of people distributing 2 points of in all these different skills that they did during that combat. I mean, is that worth it? Is that fun for anyone?
Well, we always did, like in GURPS, we always did character advancement away from the table.
Yeah.
Like you got your character points at the end of the session, and then when we come back to the next session, let me know what you spent them on,
right?
Or what you plan to spend them on.
Yeah, I don't actually award XP to my players until they take a long rest.
Okay.
And usually that, just because of the timing on things, that will coincide with the end of a session. So it's like, you guys don't get any XP because you haven't taken a long rest, or you guys have taken a long rest. You get your XP. Wasn't enough to bump you up the next level, but so don't worry about that. But anyway, all right. So there's a third question here, unless we were not done with that.
Go.
Were you ever a GM in a similar type of game, not West Marches, that cobbled together a campaign from one-shots with the same players and multiple non-player GMs, whether those GMs had to coordinate their content or not? If yes, what was that experience like? What advice would you give for people planning to play or run those types of games?
No. Yeah. I have never been in that kind of game.
I have. I have not been in the floating GM kind of game. I did have sort of a thematically similar thing with one GM who this Quantum Leap kind of thing. We were playing in Savage Worlds, and the setting would shift from essentially a high fantasy D&D kind of setting to a Deadlands setting to a cyberpunk setting,
dimension hopping kind
dimension
of
hopping, and he had a cool mechanic built into it, such that you always had all your character sheets, regardless of which version of your character you had.
Oh, so you changed characters?
You changed characters, but the thing is that, like, if I were in the cyberpunk setting, and I had a slightly different skill set because it's cyberpunk, right, as opposed to my Deadlands character who could fan the hammer, for instance,
right,
and I wanted to fan the hammer, I could make essentially a memory roll to remember what a past life me could do and gain that skill for that moment.
Oh, okay.
Just for that one moment.
Right.
Not for the whole thing, but just for that one moment. And the difficulty was how many character sheets were between your current character, or it was rather based on how many character sheets were between your current character and the one you were trying to access.
How many characters did you have?
We had 4.
Okay,
we had 4, but like the order in which you played them mattered.
Right,
the order doesn't sound like fun at all.
No, actually, it was.
It
actually really was. It was a lot of fun.
But are these all the same people? Like how are these characters tied together?
They were the same, essentially the same archetypal character in each setting.
It was like the Eternal Warrior.
Sure.
Michael Moorcock, right?
Never read it.
Sorry,
never read it.
Yeah.
Never read it.
You had essentially the same kind of mindset for each character. It was just a slightly different setting.
So is it sort of like the same person, but different things transpired in their iteration of the universe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
It's Michael Moorcock's Eternal Warrior, which is it's one hero that's reincarnated throughout the ages. And so he wrote all these various series, but they're all the same. It's the eternal way. He's constantly being brought back, and they don't have memories of their old self until sometimes they do. Sometimes later on, there's a vast discovery, like, I was Elric? Wow.
Right. No, I haven't had the rotating GM thing. Although In my gaming circle, it is occasionally brought up of the idea of doing it, and we just never have.
Right. I would not be able to not start coming up with a meta story. For like, if you had something like where there's some like this recurring artifact and you're trying to get home, it would be very difficult for me as a GM, even if I'm only GMing one session, to not throw in something like, oh, there might be some way to control this thing possibly that you could figure out at some future point.
Right.
You know what I mean? Some sort of meta thread that's going to eventually lead to a conclusion where you do get home.
I'm trying to remember. This is a little different because it wasn't multiple GMs. It was just you, but you basically ran a Traveler game with one-shots that we ended up abandoning because we all ran away. And
the whole idea of that was that were all members. The crew had an indeterminate number or the ship had an indeterminate number of crew members.
Yes.
Right, and whoever could make it to a session.
Yes.
Would be in whatever adventure that was, and that worked great until we got to the point where they said, "Oh, we're going to leave our ship over here and hire a ship," and now all our characters are spread over multiple parsecs.
The party across the entire galaxy.
Yeah.
And the ship was someplace where none of the characters were.
Right. Because Rob was like, we got to ditch the ship. It was like a hot car. It's like, everybody knows the ship. We got to ditch the ship, and everybody go find your way back to home base on your own. Bye.
Wasn't the one where like then you got another ship and one of the player characters just stole it?
I don't.
No, that was me and Star
That
Wars.
was that was a different game.
Okay, never mind. Conflating my.
That was Trig. Yeah.
But
I'm going to steal your ship.
It worked good until that thing happened. Basically, once you guys got to what my story arc was, because you had jumped into an empty system,
so you did
or
have
what
a story
you thought was an empty system. Yeah, there was a story. Oh, yeah, and that's where there's like these military ships in a system with a gray dwarf and a planet that is like some kind of weird, like nano weapon sludge. But there's a bunch of like military ships here. And you're in.
I don't think we got that far.
Yes, you
I
did.
think we jumped in and we went, oh my God, and ran away.
You freaked out
because
you jumped into the system. No, because they sent a ship to rendezvous with you.
That's right.
And they were going to kill all of you.
That's right.
And that's when you guys decided.
And we ran away.
And you ran away.
Much like this email.
And then said, they're going to recognize this ship. We need to get this ship out of here. And one of the things
we got no XP for running away, by the way.
No. And one of the things that you either didn't note or didn't take into account was the fact that you jumped into the space of a rival nation where those ships would not have jumped into.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you guys got, because the ships that you saw were like the sort of the future equivalent of the European Union Navy. And like the Russian Confederation Navy was the space that you were.
We were a little fuzzy on all the politics. I know that you had a whole political structure going on. We were like, whatever, we got a ship, we're going to kill shit. So yeah, oftentimes players don't pay attention to all of the little political machinations as much as you wish we did.
And that's why you decided that your ship was now radioactive, and you didn't want to have anything to do with it.
And Stu threw up his hands and goes, I'm done with this game.
So, what advice would you give for people planning to play or run those types of games? The floating GM game.
Well, one of the things that Bill just mentioned is that all of the GMs probably should consult to see if there is going to be a meta story and what that meta story is going to be. If this is going to be just like an ongoing Monster of the Week thing that never has a resolution, which it could, like Gilligan's Island.
Yeah.
You know, Gilligan's Island, every episode there's going to be a chance they might get off the island, but they never do, because like if one of the writers says, "Oh, I'm going to get them off the island," it's like, fuck you, you just ruined the whole story.
Congratulations, now we don't get another season.
Right.
And that's not a foreign thing. If you think about, say, television shows or comic books or anything that's episodic where you have multiple writers, multiple directors, and yet they're all still working towards an overarching meta plot. I mean,
that's why you have a showrunner.
You have a showrunner. You also have, oftentimes when a show season starts, they have, this is our end point, this is where we're starting, and we got all the stuff in the middle we got to fill up, but this is where we have to get to. It's something that simple. It happened in comic books all the time. You would end up with a fill-in issue. You would end up with some other writers taking over for a little bit. Happens all the time in television. There's different writers on every episode just because you physically can't write a show every week and keep going.
Well,
so they leapfrog writers.
Unless you're Straczynski.
So yes, Bill is absolutely right. If all the GMs sit down and say, here's where we want to end up, You have a writer's room, or at least just a loose idea of an arc. Like, well, when do we get to this point? That doesn't matter, because if you're
you do pacing's important because you don't want.
But if somebody
you don't want one of the GMs to inadvertently advance that meta plot
too far, right?
Right.
But if somebody's games take five sessions to finish and yours only takes one, it's that you shouldn't be beholden to the fact that you have to stick to one.
Yeah.
Right. I would say if you were going to have this kind of round robin thing where you were trying, I would say shoot for one shots. It depends on what your time limit is. If you're gaming at a day and a time where everyone's flexible and the session, if it's not going to be quite finished in 3 or 4 hours and you can run a couple extra hours to get to the conclusion point, go ahead and do it. But if not, I would say give the GMs the leeway to one with a maximum of 2 sessions. Right. The idea is you get it all done in one, but if you have to run a second session, or even if you have to run part of a second session, because you could conceivably have one GM show up for the beginning of it, finish up that session, and then go to the next one if you have serious time constraints.
And Monster of the Week is a great template for that, which is it's all just a string of one shots, and that you can keep going just doing that. You are a strike team that's brought in and dropped in on various hotspots around the world, the globe, the universe, whatever it is, to put out or deal with a problem.
And then you're essentially the first 2 series of Star Trek.
You're right. And then when that particular fire is put out, the other GM takes over and they light another fire and send you there. It's not hard to do. Eventually, though, I could see people just sort of getting bored of it's Monster of the Week. It's the same problem that a lot of television shows suffer from, which is it's just more of the same.
Well, a lot of them, the ones that last, end up having some kind of meta plot at some point.
That's where I'm going with that.
Some sort of why are there suddenly all of these monsters when there weren't before,
right.
or whatever.
Right, right.
All right.
The other thing is the other advice I had, which is you specifically say if you're having games where the GMs aren't players, but I gave you my advice earlier, which is we had this sort of shared champions universe with various people GMing various sessions. And one guy never GM'd, so his player ended up with all the XP. And we didn't factor that in or consider it until later on.
That where he says that he's doing this via milestones instead, that avoids that problem because then everybody's essentially leveling up at the same time.
Except, that player played more games, and just through the fact of getting more milestones than anybody else, he ended up with more XP and advancing faster. He played in all the games, and the other GM players didn't.
Yeah, I got that. Anyway, cheers. Sean from just outside Washington, D.C. Are you Jedi on Discord? P.S. Drink a tasty beverage of choice.
I just finished
mine. I've been doing so all through your email. So, P.P.S. Pretend you all are co-DMing the next story arc. Each of you contribute one element to the arc, such as setting location, the party's overall mission, a type of encounter, a BBEG, big bad evil guy detail, a secret, a MacGuffin, and so on.
That segues really well into what we're
That's
going to do
a wonderful segue.
In our collaborative world building.
Yes.
That's right.
Exactly. Oh, wait, what, are we have to do this for his type of thing first?
We're going to pull them
We can just do it for this one. We can do it.
Yeah, we're just getting part of this.
We're doing it anyway.
Fuck it, we'll do it live.
All right. So, to the world building, did anyone come up with anything for world building?
I did it.
You haven't have yours written down.
I actually took it. Yeah, I took a thing from him. So I actually was thinking about it the other day. What and I haven't done an object yet. Last time I was here, Chris made an object. So I decided to make an object. Right. And I've written it down so you can have it later to put in your notes. This is a sword named Green Slade.
Green Slade?
Green Slade. S-L-A-D-E.
Like Slade Wilson.
Yeah. Wait, Wilson, but yes.
No, Slade Wilson. Deathstroke.
Deadpool.
Same character.
This is a blade made out of a finely polished hardwood.
Ooh.
And it seems to be grown together rather than forged or carved. This is actually based on a game that when I was in high school, I first played a ranger, and one of the GMs created this blade for me. It was a different name, I don't remember all of it.
It's a lettuce knife.
So it's actually a blade that has been grown, and so it was created by an ancient elven druid. Green Slade is attuned to the forces of nature, and it's made for rangers, but any sword-wielding class could use it. It's rumored that the sword is merely one of a whole set of weapons created this way. And these stats could vary depending on what game you're playing, what level your characters are, and whatever you want to do. But this is just an example of what I would see. Let's say it's a +4 weapon. Upon drawing the blade, it casts Druidcraft around its user. The effect will cease when the blade is sheathed again. Druidcraft is a D&D spell that just sort of has...
It's a cantrip. You can cause little flowering vines to grow, bluebell flowers, slight gust of wind, a smell of flower, whatever.
So when you draw it, there's a little wind and some leaves appear, and whenever you walk around, the flowers start to bloom and seed pods open up, and so it's definitely attuned to the forces of nature at that point. It's just a passive effect. It's a look.
Yeah.
It doesn't do anything.
Right.
You can't make the leaves obscure your view or whatever. This is just
it's a special effect.
It's flavor.
Yeah.
Right.
On a natural 18 or 19, it will cast.
Well, you're getting very specific with your game mechanics.
Yeah. On a natural 18
because
or 19,
we're making it on a very good roll.
On a very good roll, it will cast Guardian of Nature upon the wielder, which lasts until combat ends. Now, Guardian of Nature is just, it gives you tree barks, armor, so it would be a buff upon the player. It would, increases their strength, increases their armor, whatever. But it's all nature-based, so basically you could be covered in vines, you could suddenly get tree bark, you get... So whatever game system you're using, something natural happens to help you as a defender.
Okay.
On a natural 20, or a really, really highly
sort of
rate
crit.
success,
Yeah,
you get... I have Searing Smite written here, but it would be an extra damage effect, whether it's a lightning bolt, whether it's a wall of force, whether it's roots that shoot through, something like that, as well as whatever damage you would get on top of the critical hit.
All right. I have... it could be an NPC. It could just be folklore.
Mm-hmm. NPC or legend.
Or legend, yes, exactly. The Star Metal Merchant. There is a pervasive legend throughout the land of a traveling merchant who sells what has been called star metal. The merchant drives a covered wagon pulled by 2 massive auroch oxen and has been seen in various markets throughout the lands. No one has ever claimed to meet such a merchant on the road. Mm-hmm. Though some claim to have seen the merchant... Right. Some claim to have seen the merchant just arriving into a town or just leaving it.
Okay.
The wagon serves as a sales stall and presumably living space for the merchant. The merchant only sells one commodity, star metal. Said to be harvested from stars that fell out of the sky, some smiths can alloy this material with steel to fashion superb quality weapons and armor. A little goes a long way with this stuff, but the cost that the merchant demands is high. The merchant does not haggle. If you do not want to pay his price, you won't get the goods.
Mm-hmm.
The price is a considerable amount of coin, never credit, and a small vial of the purchaser's blood. About an ounce. After making one sale, or after 2 days in a particular market without any sales, the merchant leaves.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So whether it's just... whether you choose to use it as just sort of this pervasive legend that is in your game, or you actually have, wait, you don't really exist, do you? That kind of thing.
Okay.
And I have it. It's on the same document I shared with you 2 weeks ago. So
excellent. Okay.
I'm just keeping it all in one place.
I also have an artifact, and this is an orb, like a crystal ball or something like that. Except it specifically, it's used by the Mage Guild or whatever it is to control the spread of magical knowledge. So they maintain their monopoly.
Okay.
How does that work?
They can take any segment of a spell, like if there's a whatever the verbal, like whatever the power words you say that cast a specific spell.
Yeah.
It can search out this orb can search out any written copy of that. So you can so if they write down on a piece of paper, ipsum lorem blah 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 or whatever, right? that's used in a specific spell.
Yeah.
And then place the orb over it, it will show them every place where there is a written version of that.
Oh, okay.
So they can hunt down and either take it or make sure it's owned by someone it's supposed to be owned by. And they mostly use this to hunt down rogue mages.
Yeah,
like if someone knows a specific if they know that someone cast a specific spell to commit a crime or do some sort of atrocity, and they know what the spell was, they can write down a portion of the spell, use the orb to find out where every written version of that is.
It also means that every dungeon and every hidden ancient shipwreck or whatever would be immediately lit up, because anyone that
if it's got a spell book in it with that spell, yes.
Right.
Which makes it really easy to control magical knowledge.
Right. Well, all kinds of knowledge. You could block off whole sections of the world and not tell anybody why, knowing full well that there's like an ancient city in there that you are busy excavating. And you don't want to let the rest of the world know because you want to control it all. Yeah, there's a lot you could do. You could have your players even be carrying this thing around. They're tasked with going to these various places and getting a hold of these spells. So but that's a powerful MacGuffin right there.
It is. And this might be something that's lost.
Yeah.
That maybe the Mage Guild had at some point and someone stole it, or there was a siege and it's believed to have been destroyed, or who knows. Again, maybe the wrong guys have it now, and now they're using it to try to collect all of the necromantic spells they want to use so they can...
Again, that falls into my favorite magical items, which is it seems fairly unique. It seems fairly harmless. It just, it tracks down missing spells.
Right.
But when you start thinking about the ramifications of it, you're like, holy shit, this is like world changing.
Yeah.
The person who controls this can control entire governments because you know where their treasuries are. You know where all their wizards are.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You know what books are in... If you want to take the time, you can figure out what books are in some mage's library.
Yeah.
Yep.
You could even find out, like I said, you could find out where all their mages are. So if you're going to attack a city, you just go through, all the fireball spells, find out where all their mages are, take them out first.
Right. That's where you aim your trebuchets.
Yeah. Again, that's I love items like that. That upon further reflection, this shit's really cool.
All right. Okay. That's it. What's my thing? Which one is it? That one.
Yay!
I picked it right the first time. Thank you for joining us for season 28, episode 16? 16 of Happy Checks RPG Podcast. My name is Stu.
I'm Stork.
And I'm Kurt.
And we'll see you next week, Saturday at 10 p.m.
10
a.m. Pacific time. HappyJacks.org/live. See you then. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
It's a hobby from Michigan to Australia and maybe East Timor. Be it riffs or exalted, GURPS or Dungeons and Dragons, hero, pathfinder, fate or savage lands, evil plots will be usurping, though we could do with less burping. Happy Jack's podcast will be douchebags all.
Why problem make when you no problem have you don't want to make?
The preceding program has been a presentation of the Angry Folk Media Empire.
Bum, 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 bum.